Fallout Wasteland Warrior is an amazing tabletop RPG for anyone who likes the Fallout series. Now today we're going to be working on just the Super Mutant, but we'll be working on many more in the future. And if you guys like this series, please remember to hit the like button. Starting with Caliban Green in an airbrush, I slowly add more and more Moot Green to brighten up the color, ending with adding Iceland Sunset to do almost like glazing with my airbrush, and mostly focusing my highlights around the upper midsection of all the muscles, as well as in the face. I'm doing this to try to build up a Fallout 4 style skin appearance for the Super Mutant. Now in the end, I probably didn't push my highlights quite enough, but I'm overall pretty happy with how this turned out. Next I did an all-over wash of Athonian Camo Shade. Now I could have put on my base layers for my leather colors and any of the fabrics that were on him first before doing this if I wanted it to have an overall dirty appearance. However, I wanted him to look a little bit more clean than that, and I wanted a lot of darker colors on him, so I knew this wash wouldn't show up on top of those darker colors. So we're just going to do this all over on his skin tone. This is going to add a lot of definition to muscles. Now you could leave it here, or you could do what I did, and that's I go back in with a bit of a brighter green glaze around the same color we ended with the airbrush in, just to kind of clean up the face and to clean up some of those different sections of muscle on his body. I wanted everything to contrast when it came to the leather and his clothing, so I'm going to head and use a nice dark dryad bark. This is going to create a nice deep rich base tone for us to build our highlights up with using XV88 later. Now if you wanted to push your highlights one step further, you could use Xandri Dust on top of that. So you would have 3 layers of colors, dryad bark as your base, a mid-tone of XV88, and then Xandri Dust as your highlight. Now with this being a general figure and it not being anything in particularly special, I didn't really want to push those highlights to an extreme, as odds are if I ever end up using this in the game, it's probably going to come off the table almost as quickly as it goes on the table. Next we're going to go ahead and base coat anything that is made of metal using our go-to gunmetal gray from Vallejo. Now this gunmetal gray is a metallic paint that is alcohol based, and its coverage is absolutely wonderful. We're going to go ahead and hit that on pretty much everything that could be made of metal, and the reason for that is we're going to be rusting the crap out of it. So although we will be using another highlight layer using Vallejo silver, we are going to keep that to a bare minimum, and we're actually going to be highlighting using our rust pigments. And like I said earlier, we're getting on to doing our highlights on all of our leather browns. This is the dryad bark, and we're going to be adding XV88 as our highlight color. Now I'm just going over, and originally I was planning to do Xandri Dust as an extreme highlight, but I actually really love the way that the XV88 looked, so we're not going to take it that far. So I'm hitting not just the edges but a little bit over, because my plan had been for this to have been a mid-tone. But I actually really love how aged this ended up making the leather look, but without making it look so ancient that it needed to be replaced. So it gave this well-worn, well-loved appearance, and I really like the way that it worked for the Super Mutant. Now I still wanted to include Xandri Dust somewhere on the miniature, so I went ahead and used it for this rope belt. Now you could also add either some kind of a color to it, whether it be like an Agrax Earthshade, which would be a brown wash, or a Seraphim Sepia, which would be a yellow wash, and then re-highlight. But again, for as simplistic as this model is, and with it not being a showpiece, I don't see the point in doing all of that extra work on such a minor detail that you're not going to notice when it's sitting on the tabletop. As long as I was working on highlights, I decided now was as good a time as any to go ahead and put in all of our highlights on anything that's made of metal. So again, we're going to be using some white aluminum. You could also use silver from Vallejo, and this is just a nice bright color. Now a lot of this does end up getting covered up when we put our weathering pigments on in a little bit here. However, the parts that do still stick out after the weathering really gives a nice pop of color, and if you wait to do it then as opposed to doing it now, it doesn't peek out from behind all of the weathering. It's very obvious that it's something that's been added after the fact. So I really like the effect it gives it, which is why we're doing it here and now. I'm just putting a little bit of color on the handle here of that sledgehammer, or the whatever it's called. I never use that weapon in Fallout, so I have no idea what it's called. Super Sledge, I think. We're just adding a little bit of red on that handle just to give it a pop of color. A lot of the rust effects that we're going to be using will kind of change up the color of the rest of the hammer, so it'll add a nice bit of variety, but I wanted to go ahead and make sure that handle had some nice bright color to it. Now the weathering pigments I'm using today are a mixture of rust orange and brick red. This is from both AK Interactive as well as from the Tamiya line. I like to mix those colors to get a custom look, and then I use rubbing alcohol to apply them like a paint. Now, you don't have to use rubbing alcohol, you can just apply them by dusting them on in layers, but I think by using alcohol you're able to put more product on more quickly without building up big, huge, chunky layers of this stuff. So, we're just going ahead and applying it all over, keeping in mind that orange rust is some of the most freshest, most newest rust that is formed, meaning that anything that is a large flat surface will probably be the place where the most orange is going to collect, as opposed to red and brown rust, which tends to be older in its nature, so that's going to get put down in all the little deep pockets and cracks and crevices and things like that. When in doubt, get the basing paste. So I wasn't really 100% sure what I was going to be doing for this base, and I really like Games Workshop's basing pastes. I like Vallejo's basing pastes. They're really, really nice. They're good texture paints for when you're not really sure what to do with the base. So I went ahead and put some Sterling Battlemire down all over the base just to kind of get him looking like maybe he was out in a field. Now I end up putting a little bit too much static grass on it when I do put flock down. However, I don't think it looks all that bad. I could have just used a little bit less, or perhaps maybe could have used the same amount, maybe used a bit more of a mixture with some more yellow in it so it looked dead. Again, this is Fallout. Using a pair of scissors, I'm just going to go ahead and cut away any static grass that's hanging out over the edge just to kind of clean things up a little bit. Normally when I'm applying static grass, I try to take care of this step while the glue is still wet. However, I wanted the grass to lay where it naturally laid. As in Fallout, a lot of times it's pretty rare to find manicured grass. So yeah, I just wanted things to look as natural as possible. So that's why I waited until now to cut away the excess. And then you can see me just kind of roughing things up with my finger a little bit, and I'm actually going to put a little bit of dry brush of XV88 on both the grass and the exposed patch of dirt just to kind of make things look a bit more dead. And here we have our final result. I know this week's video was a little bit short and a little bit late. I do apologize, but life gets in the way sometimes. In any case, we're going to be working on a basing video hopefully for next week, as long as plans don't change. We're going to be talking about different styles of bases, how I approach them, and tips and tricks for making sure you don't just waste tons of basing material when you're not really 100% sure what your final product's going to look like, especially when you want to replicate that across an entire army. Well, in any case, I hope you guys have really enjoyed today's video, and I hope you guys are looking forward to next week's video. As always, may your display case always be filled, and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.